Greetings, everybody. Welcome to today's session for PolicyPro. We're going to be doing a deep dive into 171 policy building today. One thing I'd like to start with, feel free to use your PolicyPro trial for today's event. That'll be useful. You can do it as a walkthrough. You can see how we're doing it and walk through it on your side as well. If you need a PolicyPro trial account, there's a link in the YouTube description. It takes about 2 minutes to subscribe, and you can get it up and going by the time we start the demo and walkthrough. Quick notes on the agenda. We'll do some introductions and some housekeeping tips. Then we'll go right into a deep dive into the PolicyPro policy building capability with Sean Fornwalt. We'll go through that for a bit. Then I'll be moderating some Q&As. We've had pre-submitted questions, and we'll probably take 20-25 minutes for that. And then we will have an exit poll at the end, and we always appreciate feedback on the exit poll, both on today's sessions and if there's any feedback for what we might want to do for future sessions as well. So on the housekeeping side, we expect to take about 45 minutes to an hour today. We likely will always have a hard stop right at the top of the hour if we need to. All participants will be muted today to help the speakers present without interruption. A large portion of today's event, about half of it, is going to be tied to the Q&A questions that have been previously submitted. And thanks for those of you that have submitted them. We won't be able to get to all the questions, but if you have more questions after the event, you can always email us, and we'll always try to respond back, and we'll provide additional feedback over time as well. If there is an outage, and we have yet to have this occur, just wait for a minute and then refresh the page and come back in. For your convenience, there's a link in the YouTube description for a glossary of commonly used terms and acronyms. We've also got a page later in the presentation that's got some useful links as well for resources. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand from our Exostar resource library post-event, as well as from the same YouTube link. And if you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts, request a copy of this slide deck, reach out to us at Cmmc team@exostar.com. If it's specifically around PolicyPro, we've got cmmc-pp@exostar.com as well. And we have a live chat feature on our corporate website at exostar.com, where we can also help facilitate questions and additional feedback. So first, introductions. I'm Scott Armstrong. I'm the Senior Director of our risk applications at Exostar. This includes applications that some of the large, prime and OEM contractors to the DoD leverage from a risk perspective, but it also includes a lot of the solutions that we have and we bring to market for things like Cmmc and 171 as well. I'm pleased to have with me today Sean Fornwalt from ISMS Applications. They're our partner helping to bring PolicyPro to market. He serves as the director of the client technical support departments at ISMS Solutions, and he's a key member of their PolicyPro development team as well for the product development and at QA and how they bring it to market. And a fun fact about Sean, if you haven't met him before or had this discussion, he's got a serious fondness for Harley Davidsons. He's probably got intimate knowledge about how they're built, repaired, etc. And I think he keeps that as a little fun fact about himself that I thought I'd share. Sean, over to you.
Well, thank you, Scott. And yes, I did work for Harley Davidson a number of years ago in Santa Cruz before they ended up shutting that place down because Harleys are loud. But with that, we're going to jump right into how we're going to be using PolicyPro to not only build out our policies, but then to assess those policies in order to find out how we can raise our scores either through the SPRS, get better, more comprehensive documentation that will lead us into the implementations required for CMMC certification. So for those of you who have used the site before, you're very familiar with this. This is our login. It is a platform.ismsapplications.com. We also have an on-site chat that goes to our support department, and it will assign you an agent who will help you through the process of getting through the basic functionality of the site and help you deal with any technical issues you may run into while you're using the platform. So we're going to log in, and the first thing that we're going to see once we log in after we've set up our account and we put in all of our company information is that we have two separate modules. We have one for the 800-171 as well as one for the CMMC. And one of the major questions that we do get asked frequently is, where should I start? Because these two standards are concurrently working, being in the marketplace or in the theater of operation at the same time. And what I always remind folks of is that of the 130 practices for a CMMC level 3 certification, 110 of them is the entirety of the 171. So if you have a Dfars contract currently, you are required to be compliant with 171. And then once you get to where you may have a CMMC certification requirement, there's only an additional 20 practices that will have to be built out if you're fully compliant with the 171. So in that case, we're going to hop into the CMMC module for today, and we're going to show the functionality of the platform as well as how we can use it to really help ourselves down the road of writing good policy so that we can make the appropriate changes that we have to do to not only mitigate the risk to our company, but also to our primes, to the contracts, and especially to the CUI that we've been entrusted with as DoD contractors. So the first thing here we have is the dashboard. This is going to be a high-level overview of everything that you have assessed in the platform, so that when your boss is asking you for that report of where you're at, you can export this into a PDF or an Excel file and give it to them and say, here's where we are. And as you go down the list, you'll see that there are several documents per section. Those are chronologically in descending order. So they can see the improvement from each time you've assessed a document, and it really creates a roadmap of how you're doing in building out your policies. Now, the major thing that a lot of folks that come to PolicyPro, and I'm sure that, Scott, you've had a lot of them come to Exostar as well, is that they don't know where to start, right? They're like, I just heard about the CMMC thing. I don't know where to start. I'm really confused, and it's a little bit of a daunting prospect. And that's completely reasonable if you've never worked with security policies before, especially cybersecurity policy. So what we've done alongside with Exostar is we've built out a platform that uses templates and algorithmic scoring to help you get through that process. So we're going to start with the access control section, and I like to use this one because in our trial version, everyone has access to this particular policy family or domain, depending on which standard you're working with. So what we'll do first is in the upper left, we want to select the level of certification that we are trying to get to. So if you have a contract with the DoD or a DoD contractor, but you do not have any controlled unclassified information, you want to go for a level 1, because everyone who works with the DoD or a DoD contractor is required under CMMC to have at least a level 1 certification. So you can go and you can select that. It'll give you, in this case, the 4 practices for level 1, and you'll be able to just build out that. If you have some form of technical drawing, schematic, specialized product that you're making for the DoD or for a DoD prime, you're going to most likely have the CUI or the controlled unclassified information, and you'll need level 3. So you can move back and forth. It'll just take the practices out that are not required for that level. And we only build up to level 3 because at this point in time, level 4 and 5 are for your larger research institutions and federal agencies, or the companies working on behalf of a federal agency. So with our level determined, we know what we're trying to achieve. Now we're going to start out with some very basic information so that we know what we're going to be doing. With the prepare section on here, it's a high-level overview of what this particular domain is going to be covering and what we're going to be including in it. Next, in our gather phase, this is a list, not exclusive, because you may have other documents that are not listed here, but it's a good sampling of documents you may already possess that will have the answers to the compliance questions in the standard itself. And then with our consult is that we understand that this is not an IT only problem, right? It's not something the IT department can take care of on their own. This is a whole business process. So everybody from the lowest rank and file to the CEO of the company or ownership, depending upon the structure, will have to have some involvement in this process, whether it's approving, whether it's training, or if it's simple adherence to the new rules and regs of the company when it comes to their cybersecurity. But with this, you may have folks within your organization that you can talk to answer the questions you have. And you may have a third-party contractor that does your IT for you. They will be an excellent resource for you to get the answers that you need for your policies. And once we've gone through, we've taken a look at everything that we might already have, who we need to talk to, we're going to go ahead and click our Get Started, and we're going to jump straight into our policy builder. So the policy builder is broken down into manageable sections so that you're not having to do, in the case of level 3, 22 practices all at one time, and it becomes a 8-page document. You work individual piece by individual piece, and over time, by doing it this way, you can accomplish an entire policy and making sure that you're covering everything that you should be for each of the practices. But one of the first things that I want to go over is that for a level 3 document, there are 3 additional maturity level documents that are required. They're the 999, which is the establishment of a policy, the 998, which is the practices to implement that policy, and then the 997, which is the resourcing plan for the implementation. One of the major requirements for the 999 is that you establish a purpose for a particular policy. So as you can see on the screen in front of you, we do have our purpose. It is defined with some language that goes over why we're writing this policy in the first place. Now, this is boilerplate language. It does have the company name that was supplied to the system during setup, interspersed where appropriate. If we want to go and change anything, we do have the ability to click on the little black circle with the white pencil in it. This is our edit button, and it will open up a fairly rudimentary text editor. It's not going to be Microsoft Word, but you can make some changes in here, and you can also do some formatting with bulleted lists and stuff like that. So we can expand this out and we can take a look at it, and we can say the purpose we're writing this is to define the correct use and management of logical access controls, right? In layman's speak, that means that we're trying to say that only what you need to have access to is what you're given access to, right? I don't need to have access as, the director of tech support. I don't need to see everybody in the company's personnel record. I don't need to see what their social security number is. I don't need to see what their banking account information is. That's an HR and payroll department thing. So even though I'm an administrator on our systems, I don't have access to that because it's not part of my job. But I have to have access to our client database and everything else in order to do my job and provide the support that our clients require for their issues that may come up. So this is the principle of least privilege, where we're saying only granting access to people for what they need to do their job. And this is essentially what our purpose is laying out in our policy documentation. We're going to go through, we're saying, this is how we're going to be handling everything. This is why we're writing it this way. And then we're going to go down into our scope, which is the next requirement under the 999, which is the what and who of the policy. And what I mean by that is what is going to be covered under this policy and who has to adhere to this policy. Now, as you can see from the text that's available in the template builder, it's saying that all people, right? All information resources owned and operated by the company. And in this example where it says ISMS Solutions, your company name on the system will be put in there so that it would say, operated by your company name. And then it's saying that all users, as well as contractors, vendors, are responsible for adhering to this policy. That way, nobody can say, I wasn't in the scope, I wasn't supposed to do that when something goes wrong from what they did. You want to make sure you have explicitly written out what is covered by this policy and who has to adhere to it, so everybody knows what their responsibilities are. And then here we just have some information. This is going over what I was talking about with the 999, the 998, and the 997. And we do have a separate policy or a separate template rather for the 997 because the resourcing plan is very difficult for us to assess because we don't know what kind of capital you have available, what expertise within your personnel do you have, what what physical controls do you require, what system controls. All of these things will vary, especially when you look at it from the perspective of, do I have 5 employees in my company or do I have 15,000 employees in my company? One of those companies is going to have vastly more resources and expertise available to them than the other. And that's who we built this platform for, is the smaller companies that don't have the expertise and the personnel to do this for themselves, or they don't have the money to hire a consultant to do it for them. And a little secret on that, you're still going to have to learn what the policies are so you can follow them in the end. So we're going to start off here and we're going to go right into the first practice. And the way that we have it set up is that we identify with the marker. So the AC, which is access control, the 1, which means it's a level 1 practice, and then the 001, meaning that it's the first practice of the CMMC standard. We list out the standard language so that you know precisely what the standard says, and you don't have to be flipping back and forth trying to remember what it said. It's right here for you to view easily. Now, we do have some guidelines where we'll go through and say, this is what you need to be including here. So you know what you're doing, what you're including, and why. The other thing that you can see here is that this does say May 7th of 2021. This is a timestamp that the system puts on it for the last time something was saved in this particular section by a user on the platform. That way you can tell if you go back in here and you're like, hey, my name's not on here and it's definitely since I was in here last, that's the person who made a change to it, and you'll need to talk to them about what changes they made, because you can have up to 4 users on an account. Now, the same thing here, we go into the edit button. You're able to go in, see what the template language says, fill in as appropriately how your company does things. The button next to it is our reset button, because even the most practiced policy writers will sometimes get out into the weeds too far. And you just want to start over from scratch where you were at the beginning. And this will take you back to what the policy language was in the template before you started making changes. And just to make sure that everyone is aware of this, it only resets the particular practice it's in, not the entirety of the domain, because that would be a lot of work to get rid of in one click. So that's how our policy builder works at a very high level. But what I want to go over in more detail today is how our policy assessment works. And I just want to make sure that we're good here. So we'll log right back in. But I want to make sure that everyone understands how the policy assessment works, what the score means, how you can use our KENNY system, or our key elements not included, to make sure that your documentation is covering everything that it should be as you're writing it. And this will help you to make sure that you're covering everything that the SPRS is looking for, that the standards are looking for, and then when you come up for your audit, what you have to have implemented from your policy documentation to pass your certification audit. First thing that we're going to want to do, we select our domain, and it does default to access control because it is the first one. We're going to next select the level at which we want to assess this document, because at level 1, there are 4 practices, where at level 3, there are 22. And the scoring will vastly differ if we're not doing the correct level of the document we're assessing. So we're going to select our level 3, click our upload. We will get this little document queue. We're going to attach a document. Just give it 1 second. It'll show you what documents we're about to upload. You can upload multiple documents into this and it will aggregate them together as though it was a singular document for scoring. So if you have multiple little disparate policies that cover the different aspects of a certain domain, you can put them in together and it will assess everything as though it were one document. So we hit our submit button, and in a couple of seconds, our algorithms have run through with our expert learning, and it has come back with a relevance score. And I want to emphasize that this score is a relevance score, not an academic score. So it's not saying this is a C-level policy. It's saying that this is 73.9% relevant, and in our research and in our understanding, anything above a 50% is in the good range. The higher the score would mean that the policy is covering more of the requirements of the standard than one that has a lower score. So as we go through this, I just want to explain the different aspects so that everyone's sure they know and understand how they can work things out to get a better policy. First of all, though, I do want to say that the scoring within this particular platform does not extend outside of it. I don't know that if you go to an assessor and say, hey, I got a 85 on my policy in PolicyPro, they may look at you like they don't know what you're doing, right? So this score is for within the platform itself. It does not directly go to anyone else. It just stays within here for your assessment purposes. But the first thing we look at here is our relevance. And this is saying how relevant is this document to this particular section of the standard. Above a 50% and high or up, yeah, above 50% is going to be you're covering a majority of the issues, but you may still have a couple of things that you're missing, but you're on the right track. The model similarity is looking to, our templates on the system, have you modified them significantly so that it's no longer a template document? And in this particular case, it's telling me that I have not. It's very similar to our template document, so you probably will need to go and customize it further so that it is actually reflecting what you're doing. And then our word count is just the check that we have to say you're not going to write an access control policy in 500 words. It needs to be a little bit longer. This particular document is long enough, so it's telling us that the word count is good. But here's the part of it that really helps when trying to figure out what I need to cover, what I have covered, and what I haven't. So if we click on our detailed scorecard, we're going to pull up our scorecard. We will again see all of our scoring areas as well as our score. But now we have our kenning, or our key elements not included. We have two types. We have a control specific, which are directly mapped to the particular standard, and it will have a particular section where it belongs. Our general policy kennies are terms and phrases that are found in documents of this type, although not directly mapped to the standard, and they're recommended to be included. So our first one here is, we have emergency accounts. It's gone through our document and it has said that it is not finding our document or our emergency accounts. Second here. So if we export our template and we take a look at it, we can see that I only made a change to one section. This is in line with our similarity score. But now if we go into the AC.1.001, it's not finding the term emergency accounts. But what it does tell me, if we're looking here, says temporary and emergency accounts are intended for short-term use. This is directly out of the standard and why it's looking for emergency accounts. If I go into that particular section within my document, let's see here. So we go to AC.1 and we go, what types of accounts? Okay, so here I have listed out the different types of accounts that I have for my particular organization. And as we can see, I have listed temporary accounts. I haven't explained what they are, when they're used, or anything like that, because that will vary depending upon the definition within the organization. But I have effectively covered part of that concept under the emergency accounts. But it does bring up a good point that I should also have emergency accounts, right? Now, they're not going to be a standard account, but they may only have standardized access. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say under here, under specialized account, we will put in an emergency account. Because now, in the case of an emergency that we need to have an administrative level account created, which is considered a non-standard account, we want to make sure that we're identifying that we are able to do that, and then we want to explain when we'll do that and how we'll do that. Now, the problem with explaining the when and the how is that when may not change, right? When there's an incident, when there's something that's gone wrong, and we need to have emergency access to our system. The how may change, because if you're using Windows Active Directory, it may be done one way. If you're using another operating system's Active Directory, it could be done a different way. And if you make that change within your organization, whether it's, whatever the reason may be, if you're making a change to how you're doing it and it is illustrated within your policy, that policy will then have to be re-reviewed, and then it may require an additional certification audit down the road. It may not, but it may also require you to go through the process again to be sure that what you're doing in your policy is what you're doing in your organization. One of the recommendations that I do make for this sort of a situation is that keep any procedures or processes that are listed within your policy at a generalized or high level of granularity, right? We make emergency accounts for this particular reason when this should occur, right? Because you're talking about an incident, something that could go wrong, and you require emergency access. The process of actually creating that account, however that may be, within your Active Directory setup, you put into a standard operating procedural manual, so that if you have to change the software or the process or the procedures of how you do something, you're making that in an internal procedural document, not in the policy itself. So the policy doesn't have to change because you're still going to be setting up the emergency account, but the way you're doing it may change because of again, whatever the reason, the software changes, the personnel, the procedures change because there was an update to the software. Any number of things could change how something is done, and keeping that separate in a standard operating procedural manual is a good way to handle that. So if we go back, and I just want to do one more because I do want to get to our Q&A session and make sure that we get to all of them. So we're going to go and find another term. Let's try to find a different section here. So if we go to loss or damage, right? So this one is directly mapped to the 006, or the limit the use of portable devices or portable storage devices on external systems. If I go into my document and I take a look and I go down to the 06, let's see, there's the 04, the 05, and the 06. So what the template is telling me is that we're restricting the use of it, to authorized individuals. But we can also see that I have a separate removable media policy, right? This is an internal policy that is not necessarily in the standard itself, but we may have the damage or loss of that device covered in that particular policy. So we can either reference to it, or we can take it out of that policy and include it here. And again, that will come down to what is the process and procedure, what are the steps we go through in the event of damage to one of these devices or the loss of it. So you'll want to go through, the Kenny acts as a concept catch. So it will say, we went through your documentation. We did not find this particular phrase. Could you go back in and make sure that it's there? Now, you don't have to use the exact language for it. One of the other ones that is within the taxonomy is a predetermined number. And what that is referring to is the unsuccessful login attempts. That after a predetermined number of unsuccessful login attempts, the account should log. You're not going to have in your document the words a predetermined number. You're going to pick a number. You'll say after 3 or after 5. So the concepts and the terms within the Kenny system are there to say, we did not see this in your document. Go back and make sure that you're covering it. And if you're not covering it, it needs to be covered. Now, one of the things that a lot of folks will ask me after they've gone through this is, where do I find the information in order to do this or to figure out what I need to do? Now, there are two ways to get to our reference library. You can click on this particular link right here in the detailed scorecard, or you can click on this icon right here on the left-hand navigation. If we go to that reference library, what this is that we've gone out and found the documentation that the CMMC in this particular case is referencing to. So what we can do is we can select from our table of contents, or we can scroll down and see all the different types of documents that have the information that we need. Whether that is the Nist CSF, the CERT RMM, the sys controls, or any of the actual reference documents in CMMC. You can go through here, you can pick the document you want. It will take you to either the hosting website of it, or it will take you to the PDF of the document so that you can review that particular section to find out how you need to approach the topic and how you should be doing it. Now, once we, and again, the 800 series is at the supporting series behind the 53 and the 171, and by proxy, the CMMC, with some other ones thrown in there. So you'll go through, you'll pick out which one you want to be working with. You'll go to that document, look through the PDF, learn what you need to know, and then you're able to make a decision on how you're going to address it in your policy. Now, with the assessment, and once you have gone through your Kenny, you've worked your document, you can then re-upload it. It will score it fresh again so that you get a new score, and hopefully your Kenny score has gone down and your numerical score has gone up. I would not put a huge amount of investment into that number going up by a lot or a little. You want to make sure that your Kennys are covered. And you could say, I've covered that. I'm going to ignore it. And as long as it's covered, that's okay. So that's how the Kenny system works, and that's how the scoring works, is that it's there to say, we did not find this. Make sure that you're covering it, and your documentation should be good. And then once you get through and you've gone, you've done the necessary steps, you've gotten the document sorted out, you can then go through and use our management approval function so that by clicking this, it's saying that at this point in time, this is our policy document, right? So once we hit yes, it will put a timestamp with the date and the time at Greenwich Mean, and then in the road or down the road or in the future, what we will be able to do is when we're doing our 6-month review on this policy, and we've had to make an update because there was a new ransomware attack that caused all sorts of issues, that we've had to readdress how we're doing something, we can upload that, we can see what the score is, and then we can click that as the new management approved, and then we have a record of our process of review. So that way we know that, every 6 months we're reviewing this. When the auditor asks, are you consistently reviewing your documents to make sure you're up to date? Because this is not a one and done. You don't write the policy, get it approved, implement it, and then be like, I'm done, I'm out. That's not how it works. You have to go back and review it to make sure that everything's up to date and it's still functioning properly. And this little feature on the platform will help to keep a record of that so that it shows that you're working towards compliance as well as reviewing to make sure you're up to date. So with all of that said, I know that that's a lot of information to take in a short period of time. So one of the things that we do at ISMS Applications alongside our partners at Exostar is that we do offer 2 days a week. We have a Policy Building 101 course where you can come and listen to different topics about cybersecurity, about policy writing, so that you can get the extra little bit of help that you may need to do this yourself. Because this is a daunting process if you look at it from the outside. But with it being broken down into manageable pieces, this is absolutely something that can be done by anyone with the right tools and knowledge. And my favorite example of that was I had one gentleman who was in his early 80s, and now this was back in 2019, but he was in his early 80s, the only employee in his company. Not the greatest guy with computers, but he could fix a jet engine like nobody's business. And I appreciated that. With having worked on motorcycles, having been a mechanic myself, I could understand his position. And with using the PolicyPro platform in roughly 3 months' time, he did call me 3 to 4 times a week, asking me questions, saying, hey, what does this mean? What does that mean? But he was able to write his policy documents to an acceptable level in a roughly 3 months. And he was the only guy in his company, not the only guy working on it, the only individual in his company. And he was able to do it using tools like PolicyPro. And now we have tools like Certification Assistant, which can help you to manage the process, to keep records, to help build out your SSPs and get you towards compliance to where you're supposed to be under the standards. So, Scott, with that, I know I went a little sales pitchy on that one, but this is absolutely, and again, I feel everyone can do this with tools like this.
Sean, I think that was excellent. I appreciate that. Especially the comment that it's not a one and done is key. You know, I was looking at a new executive order that came out from the White House last night where, you know, they've got a 60, 90, 180-day plan for how to revamp cybersecurity initiatives, not only in the federal government, but out in the private sector. And a lot of this goes back to solar winds and other things. But one of the things I noticed it called out is they need to be doing guidance out to the private sector on cyber incident reporting back into the federal government, especially the critical infrastructure and folks like that are in the defense industrial base that already have to do it today. But that's a case where you need to say, I've got incident response procedures I need to modify. We need to look at the regulatory environment we're in. It's a constant thing that you do need to maintain these things appropriately. Totally agree. So let's go to some of the questions I've got. Let me see. First, before I go to the questions, I just want to mention in the link in the YouTube description, there's an exit poll. We'd like everybody to do this today. It only takes a few minutes. You can start it now or you can start it later. We're still going to be answering questions for about 20 minutes is my expectation. So now on to the Q&A. And Sean, I'll throw some of these at you and then we can, you know, banter back and forth if we've got some different perspectives on how it goes forth.
Absolutely.
The first one says, are you required to do a third-party advisory before getting a final assessment or audit? And this, I'm assuming this could be thinking about an assessment from a 171 assessment, maybe by a DoD agency versus trying to get CMMC certified. So is that a requirement? What are your thoughts there?
Again, with the CMMC covering a majority of the 171, I wouldn't say it's a requirement from everything that I've heard from talking to folks, but it is a good step in the right direction. I mean, I don't see it as a requirement, but it may be helpful.
And I'll put my 2 cents in. You're square on there, Sean. It all depends on your readiness and your knowledge and skill set. If you've been skilled in the art of developing policies, collecting evidence, and going through third-party audits from DIPCAT or somebody else, you might be fully prepared. But if this is your first time going through an audit, whether from DIPCAT or from a CMMC certification, I would highly recommend doing, and I know on the CMMC side, when they do those certifications, they've got a 90-day window from beginning to end. And if you can't get it through in that process, you'll have to restart and be paying for it again. So sometimes I would still say fully do your own self-assessments and prep, but then sometimes that's, cheap insurance, so to speak, to have a third party come in and do a readiness assessment. All right, here's one about a work group network. Can it be certified? And that's an interesting term, certified, for both Nist and CMMC. What are your thoughts on that, Sean?
Again, that certified is an interesting term there. It would really depend on the type of data flow through it and what's being, processed through it. If it's not touching CUI, then no, it doesn't require certification. But if it does have, FCI or the federal contracting information, it's a minimum level 1.
That's exactly right. So if there's no CUI, that particular system would be maturity level 1, and there's no 171 requirements on it. If you are managing controlled and classified information in that work group network, both 171 would apply, as well as CMMC level 3 or higher. Spot on. Now, this is one I've had some fodder on some work groups I'm in, but I'll see if, do you know whether the federal government has begun officially marking anything as CUI? I know of the guidelines, but they actually started passing anything marked as CUI to a contractor yet. And this particular individual hasn't been seeing any yet. So should they be asking that question when they're awarded work? What are your thoughts, or what have you heard on that front, Sean?
Well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit because one of the biggest questions I get asked is, do I have CUI?
Yep.
Right? They're like, tell me if I have CUI, what level do I have to be? And I always refer them to their contract, right? And one of the interesting things about it is that everybody knows the federal government is not good at labeling things. They haven't been. They've admitted they're not good at it. But CUI can be something as simple as I buy a oscilloscope and I put a particular configuration on it. Well, that configuration is CUI. You have to go back to your contract, and if it's not clear in your contract, go back to your contracting officer, talk to your prime and say, is this CUI? What level do I have to be so that I know what I have to do, right? I can't do something that I'm not aware I have to do.
Totally agree. Now, I have seen where some DoD agencies have been proactively marketing things as CUI, but then in their discussions with prime contractors, they still use the term FOUO, which now falls under the CUI side of things. So I
Right.
think it's a beginning trend. I've also heard, though, from other individuals, it could take several years for, folks to be doing it uniformly. So from that perspective, I think people, whether you're a direct prime contractor or supplier, you need to be vigilant yourself to make those clarifications and understanding if you've got CUI or not, and if you've got that contractual responsibility. Because if CUI does flow into your networks, you've got that responsibility and liability, whether it's marked that way or not.
Right.
Probably
And
also, yeah. Go ahead,
well,
Sean.
the other thing I was going to point out, and I don't have the particular clause where it is, but it does say that CUI is any information coming out of the Department of Defense. So, but even without that withstanding, having good cyber hygiene, good solid cyber hygiene is great for CUI, but it's even better for your own intellectual property. Because just because you don't have government intellectual property doesn't mean someone's not going to try to steal yours. So the more cyber secure your organization can be, the better off you are. I mean, I look at it as, and again, with the Harley thing, I remember when they first came out with the keyless fobs, right? You just keep it in your pocket, you start the bike up. I could not tell you how many people would come into the service department in Santa Cruz because they're on vacation or whatever, and they hung that up on their wall in their garage, and then they drove off and didn't have it when they had to start their car or start the bike back up out on the road. And if I could have just said, hey, common sense, keep the key with you. And I think that now too, it's like you have to protect your stuff. And if you're not going to protect it, it's not going to be safe and secure. So even if you do any work with a DoD contract that has anything that's technically involved, whether it's making screws for airplanes, windshield wipers for submarines, or you're just setting up PCs for them, that should be considered CUI unless otherwise indicated.
All right, I've got a fun follow-up question to that. Unrelated, but I think it is actually directly related. What are the benefits of 800-171, which is the NIST special pub that specifies, the 110 controls that are tied to that mandate? What would you say the benefits are? Then I'll come back with some that I want to toss in as well.
It's a good, solid starting point for good cyber hygiene, right? Almost every aspect of today's economy runs off of the internet. And something as simple as, like we just saw the gas rush of the last week, right? They hacked into an oil company, and in order to keep things from getting worse, they shut down all their systems without knowing what was going on. And now a pipeline gets shut down. You got people doing I guess this could be considered the toilet paper rush from 2020 because they didn't have proper cybersecurity. Now they may not work directly with a DoD contractor, but they supply a lot of material that DoD contractors use. And it affects DoD contractors, it affects the DoD, it affects everyone. So having good, solid cybersecurity and going by, maybe you're not going to do the 171 because you're not dealing with DoD. At least look at the CSF, right? Do something because everybody's an interconnected part of the entire economy. And if one part stops working, trust me, I've worked on enough transmissions. If one gear goes out, the whole thing stops working. So we have to look out for each other, but more importantly, ourselves to keep the mechanisms running.
Totally agreed. If you look at 171 and, a lot of people might think I just might be a maturity level 1 type of thing for CMMC, which is kind of the law of the land for federal contract information. But if you look at really trying to protect your business or your IP, you could cherry pick some of the requirements from 171 that I know DoD views as very risky ones not to be implementing. And I heard even with the Colonial Pipeline, things like multi-factor authentication, that's one of the huge blockers to people hacking into systems rather than just using, username and password. And even like regular backups that you validated so that you can do restoration. In the case of ransomware, that's where, I've heard they've paid out millions of dollars in this case. But, any business is at risk. And if you really are caring about keeping your business viable and decreasing those risks, and because cybersecurity threats are real, especially if you're in the defense industrial base, the benefits are truly it's security, it's protecting not only national security, but it's protecting your business and your financial interests.
Well, I would actually say that the smaller guys in the defense industrial base are bigger targets because our adversaries aren't hacking Boeing and Lockheed. They're going to the 150,000, outside of the supply web suppliers and taking little bits of information and then doing an aggregation to figure out how we build our F-35s.
In that aggregation, believe it or not, takes that level of information from being considered CUI potentially up to being, a classified type of data set once they get it. So that is
Right.
truly the threat. And that's where they're trying to go, what I call the soft underbelly, rather than going to the most secure top of the pyramid, the prime contractors. They're trying to go further down and assembling all that information. And that's a lot of the drivers behind CMMC and trying to get that whole fully secure supply chain as well.
Absolutely.
All right, let me see. It says, I know the year 2025 is the target year for CMMC. I've got some clarifications there we can add in. Do you know when the government will begin audit of our contractors' compliance towards CMMC, and how will our level 1 through 5 be determined? There's probably a couple nuances for an answer there. Do you have some thoughts there, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to probably 200 people in the last 6 months that asked me that precise question of what's my CMMC level, right? I've talked to folks who are electricians, to people that pay parking lots, to people that do COT stuff. And if you work with the DoD at all, or a DoD contractor at all, you're level 1. If you have anything of a technical nature that's a specific, or you have a very precise specification of what you're doing for them, consider it CUI and go level 3. But again, the contract should determine that. The contracting officer with the prime should do that. And again, I mean, the DoD could label it as a level 5, and then it goes out to someone like Boeing or Northrop Grumman, and then they're going to say, well, this particular product or part of the process is a level 3, right? So they're the ones that are going to determine that. But again, if you're doing any work with the DoD, bare minimum level 1. If you're doing anything of a technical nature, level 3.
Yep, and I do know I've got a webinar next week with a guest from the Defense Acquisition University who's responsible for training the acquisition staff. A key part of his training for them is to help as they write the RFPs that the primes have to deal with, to be able to help say what part of the tasks need to be done at which level certification, because there might be some things that would be level 1, or it might be level 3, it could be level 5, but that's where those RFPs should have it well defined, and then it should be trickling down into your subcontracts and whatnot where it's specified. So you could have one contract that might require level 1 and another one that requires level 3, and it's then your business with how you're taking it forward that matters. So here's the question, and we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left. In a multi-layered organization where there's a parent and subsidiaries, can the subsidiary utilize the parent's documented policies, or should the subsidiary do their own policies? What's your feedback on that?
Well, I would look at one specific domain, right? And configuration management. If you had 2 geographically distant locations, they're probably going to have different configurations, right? Technology fails at different rates, it gets updated at different rates. So at bare minimum, your configuration will be different. You may have different local regulations and laws about what you can and can't do. You may have one of the companies in another country, so you have now, different national laws that you have to take into account. You could be in the European Union and be subject to GDPR. There's a number of different scenarios where the individual business unit should have its own policies to best address their situation.
Totally agree. Now, that's where I've heard that question with system security plans as well. And the reality is it gets back very specifically to your company because of the regional differences. There's scenarios where you could have centralized policies and individual SSPs by different locations, they get different CMMC certifications. There's the ability to do it, a lot of different ways. The key thing though is looking at all your compliance requirements, as Sean brought up, but also look at the resources that you can apply to it, especially as you go down doing CMMC certifications, because each certification, if you have to do 10 locations versus doing one for an enterprise, you've got to build up those cost models and understand that as well. So that's definitely, there's not a single right answer to that, but it all goes back to your business requirements. I do have one question here. What's the cost for PolicyPro, Sean?
So right now, the PolicyPro cost is $14.99, and that's for just the PolicyPro platform. I know that you guys are also running some bundles with the certification assistant, so I'll let you speak more on that one.
Yeah, and that's where if we do a bundled with our standard version that goes up to CMC level 3, I forget what the discount is, but there's a discount for getting them both bundled. And that's becoming a pretty popular choice right now. I've got a question here. When does the government expect contractors to achieve full compliance with NIST 171 under Dfars? What's your response there? And I'll just add some color commentary on that.
So they were supposed to have reported their compliance as of November 30th of 2020. But again, just like they were supposed to be, they were supposed to be self-attested to be compliant, but I believe it was 2017 or 2018. So I mean, it'll come down to, if you have an incident, you better be sure that you're compliant and it wasn't something in your setup that caused the issue. But it's going to come down to when the DCMA gets out and does the audits, when the DoD gets out and does the audits. So best bet, get compliant now, because you don't know when it might come.
Yeah, so I'll add a little commentary on the word compliance there, because the 171 compliance that was first called out in, deadline 2017, then now where people have to do basic assessment scoring and submitting their scores to the DoD in their risk system. Compliance on the 171 side allowed you to have an action item called a plan of action milestone. So you could have a control not implemented, but a schedule and resource plan to say it'd be implemented in a year or two. Part of the problem that the DoD realized with all the adversaries going on is that people are doing a paperwork exercise and not necessarily taking it seriously. So you can be compliant with POEMs with 171. With CMMC, that goes away. So if you're targeting CMMC level 3 and you know it's going to take a year to get there, you've got to eliminate all your 171 POEMs plus the additional work you need to be doing for CMMC. What I do know the DoD is looking at when they look at what's called the System Performance Risk System, SPRS for an acronym. That's where you're supposed to be reporting your summary score, which if a perfect score would be 110 for 171. You could also have a negative score down to negative 205 if you haven't implemented any controls. They're looking to see the defense industrial base report their scores and improve over time. So this is getting away from saying, are we compliant or not, to really how secure are you? And the DoD wants to manage that risk. And they know there's going to be imperfect scores that are in there, but what they want to see is continued trend as you remove POAMs, and track your ability, update your SSPs, update your policies. All those things affect how you get scored, because a lot of the evidence you need for the controls or practices go back to the appropriate policies. And then the fact that you're actually implementing those policies with your procedures and how your staff executes. Because when you go through an audit, whether it's from DIBCAT or for CMMC from a third party, they're going to be asking for your system security plan. That's going to give them the index of everything they want to review. They're going to ask for your IT policies, because that's all the things that also ties into key evidence. But they're going to be interviewing people as well. So if your system administrators don't answer the questions the way the policies are written and the way the system security plan aligns, then that's where you've got issues. All those things need to line up together. And that doesn't happen just in a month or two. This is a journey. It's certainly an initial effort to get a lot of this stuff lined up, but then it's a maintenance effort. The good news is, once you've embarked on the journey and you build this as a standard practice for maintaining it, that eases the burden. So 3 years from now, as you're maintaining these artifacts and documents, and it becomes a regular part of what we do in the DoD, in the supplier base, it's not the heavy lift that we're all experiencing now. And that's part of the solution sets that we're trying to bring to bear to help ease that process as well. Because it is, while it involves paperwork and things like that, without getting it documented, it's not going to get done. If it's not written down, it's not going to be followed. And that's the whole purpose behind this, is really not for compliance, but to raise the bar of security. And really that's national security, but it's also protecting your business interests, your IP and whatnot. So I think we've run up against the clock for today. I want to thank everybody for their attendance today. We do have in the slide deck, we can, if you can request this as well, additional sources of information on our products, some links to the DoD website for the SPRS reporting process, some information there. Also, if you need consulting partners, we've got a set of partners that are focused on consulting on the CMMC side and 171 as well. And I want to thank you for joining us. Hopefully you've all finished the poll in that exercise, and I look forward to seeing you all at another session again. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
There.
Alrighty.